Hey, what's up? This is Dilio on Dilio Knows Music, and in this video, I'm going to talk about how I got started in music production. It's a long story, but it won't be too long. It's a story that started a long time ago when I was a child. See, growing up in Flint, Michigan, I had a mother who played piano, and she would play for the church. She would play at home and jam, and she actually had synthesizers. She had different keyboards, not a whole lot. Had some good speakers for it, and in the basement she would jam and play her music, and that was kind of one of the original things that kind of got me into the door with music. Of course, there's music in the family. Both sides of my family played music, so every time I went to any of my grandmother's house on my mom or my dad's side, there was music. On my dad's side, there was definitely a piano in the house. I had an auntie who plays, and then on my mom's side, there were musicians in the house. My uncle who stayed over there played guitar, and my cousin who was a pianist, who is a pianist. And so there was always music around me, and then in school it was always around. But as far as getting into music production, I say it started when I got my first tape recorder. When I got my first tape recorder, I would imitate things that I heard from the radio, from around me, and I would eventually figure out that if I took one tape recorder and I put it next to another tape recorder, I could then sort of do this pseudo dubbing. And so I would do beatbox in my mouth and sing. And that was sort of like my first way of doing it. And then, sometimes I would mess with my mom's keyboards, and sometimes I would get in trouble because, everybody thinks kids break things when they try to investigate things. But I took to it naturally. I started learning how to play chords. And then eventually, whenever I would go with my grandma's house on my mom's side, my cousin who was further down in the game, I would look at his equipment and wow, he has keyboards and sequencers, and I'm soaking all this stuff in even though I don't understand it, and I would just kind of watch what he did, and then I would try to participate as much as I could. Of course, I'm the little cousin, reaching on the side of the desk, bothering the teenager, but eventually things changed where I finally got my own keyboard. So in 1996, well, that's a long time ago, I got my first keyboard. My mom bought my first keyboard, but that's kind of fast forwarding a little bit because, see, my mom had MIDI interfaces, and I would play with those. But eventually, I got my first keyboard at about 14, so that way I could stop bothering my mom's keyboards. It was from a Sam's Club. It was a Yamaha PSR 510. I actually have another one now, not my original, but I have another one now, and that was when I really started to kind of get into music production because I would make beats on that, imitating things I heard from new age music to hip hop songs. And that keyboard was a preset keyboard for you play chord. It wasn't really set for program, even though you could step record in it. And I actually started step recording before I could quantize what I was doing. I didn't understand what quantize meant at the time, and I didn't ask anyone. I just didn't know. And then on top of that, though, there were still computers around in the house, too. So therefore, eventually what happened was that my cousin would pass me software that he would get from a friend. And one of those programs was Little Drummer Boy. Little Drummer Boy was out way before FL Studio. And even then, there was another program called Hammerhead. And if I really think about it, there were other programs on the Commodore 64. I think the software was called Music Time. And I would just play with that and make sounds. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was still tooling around with it until eventually, it all culminated from there. So that's kind of how I got started in it, and then things evolved. I was messing with a software called Hammerhead. It was like because the thing was, there was computers in the house, but there wasn't really samplers in the house. Samplers were around. Samplers were a thing, but samplers were way too expensive, and there was no way as a child could convince my parents to get me a sampler unless they themselves knew about it and could connect the dots. And that's something I wish they did. However, eventually I did get more advanced computer software, which enabled me to sample. And I was just kind of doing pseudo sampling thing. I got into Cakewalk and music tracks, and I was learning about MIDI the best way I could. And then eventually, and I'm kind of abbreviating it, but I kind of went into FL Studio. So I think one day in high school, a friend of mine from another high school, I was getting kind of like this special skin center thing in Flint, Michigan. A friend of mine told me about Free Loops. I was like, what's that? Because I guess somehow it was known that I did beats anyway, or I was certainly musically inclined at the time. and he told me about FL Studio, and I downloaded it, and then whoa, this computer is way nicer than anything I've ever done to make music on my computer or on my mom's computer at the time. And I eventually did get my own computer, still learning about music production and what I'm doing there. And I was an FL Studio guy, and I was starting to sample into that, and that was my thing for a very long time. And I wasn't really exposed to the MPC like that. No one was around to tell me about the MPC. I remember seeing it in a video, but even then I didn't know exactly what that did, so I never could connect the dots. Now, I seen an ASR, I learned about that, but again, it's one of those things where I wish that my parents would have taught me how to save money for that. It was more or less, I'm not buying that, that's too expensive, and that was it. It wasn't, well, hey, do you really want this? Well, let's learn how to save money. I never had that opportunity. But eventually I did get my own computer with money that I raised from my high school open house, which was pretty darn cool. What happened next after that? Things evolved, and I was an FL Studio guy. Moved on to Reason at once upon a time when I was at Full Sail University. Still did a lot heavily in FL Studio. And I didn't get my first MPC till about when the new MPC lines came out. So before then, I did get Machine, maybe around 2009, 2010. Then I got into the MPC. And, I've gotten one placement with Crazy Bone back in 2004. And, I thought that was going to be a life change. It was not. But it still was cool to know that I did get a placement, major placement with semi-popular recording artists at the time. Bone Thugs was maybe peaked at their group, and then they started doing their own things, but still doing their thing, still known. So that was cool. And that's basically how I got into music production. If I could just wrap it up in a short story, it was that I had music in the house. My mom played piano, so there was always keyboards. There's pianos and instruments on my mom and dad's side, their grandparents. And I also had a cousin that was big into music production, but he wasn't a hip-hop producer or R&B producer. He's more like a new age jazz classical music producer. So all the hip hop influences I had to pick up on my own. And, when it came to MPC and sampling, I'm sure if he had an MPC, I probably would have ended up having an MPC. But that's not necessarily how it went. But yeah, that's how I got into music production. So yeah, more stories, tutorials, things like this. I'm Dilio. Welcome to my new channel, Dilio Knows Music. Got a lot more stuff like this available coming soon. 3 videos a week probably is going to be the schedule. Please like, comment, subscribe to this channel, and let's see where we can go from there. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.